Hello, I think I'm live. So I'm Grace. A few of you might know me. I'm one of the mentors of Future Yard, and today we're going to be talking to Tony from Come Play With Me, which is a fab organisation who are based in Leeds and do loads of amazing work around equality and diversity issues. And if there's any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try and get to them. So I'm going to bring in Tony now. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Yeah, oh, looks so fancy. Hello. So I thought the best thing to do was first, could you sort of explain a little bit about Come Play With Me's work? I think you're the best person to do this. And then also talk about a little bit about your role as well and how that fits into the company.
Yeah. So, like you said, we're based in Leeds. We're a non-profit music development organisation. So we support lots of people from marginalised backgrounds to get jobs in the music industry, whatever that looks like. So around 8 years ago, we started as a label, and we were predominantly supporting musicians to record their first single, put that out on a 7-inch record. I think we've done like 20, 30 of those. Since then, we've kind of grown the label a lot more, and now we do compilations, and we're in a place now where we're starting to support artists more long term. So we're not just doing one release with them, we're doing more things. And then on top of that, we help promoters get sort of their first experience of promoting a show. So if you've never promoted anything before, you want to put on an event that's music based, we have a program that helps people do that, so people can apply. We do sort of like 20 events a year, something like that, with brand new promoters that have never done anything before or never sort of had that experience, and then hook them up with mentors and shadowing opportunities and things like that. So hopefully they can keep that momentum going. And continue to do events and continue to put things on in and around Leeds and Yorkshire, and around our region, which is also really nice. We do so many other things as well. We've got a lot of hats that we wear. So we have a podcast that we put out. We're currently recording the second series, and it's for queer musicians and queer people that work in the music industry to share their experiences and meet other people that do the same thing. And we have a magazine which comes out every 2 months. And again, it's like a way of telling the story of marginalised people that work in music, whatever that is. So we don't necessarily do reviews or anything like that, but we're there to kind of get under the skin of things and talk about people's experiences and share their stories and stuff. So yeah, we do loads of different things. And my role is kind of looking after all those things and all those projects, but also making sure that we are as diverse as possible with the people that we're putting out, with the lineups that we put on, with the guests that we have on podcasts, people we talk about in the magazine and things. And I also run our LGBT inclusion workshops, training and consultancy. So we work across the music industry, talking to people about LGBT inclusion, talking about trans inclusion, and things like that, and helping people sort of take their next steps into being more inclusive too. So yeah, loads of stuff, but it's very fun.
I think I always forget how much Come Play With Me do because I've known you all for quite a while now. But I think what I like about Come Play With Me's work is it's across so many different sectors, and especially like the work you do in event management, like getting more women and marginalised genders and people from different backgrounds into putting on their own events with support, which is something that I think we also are doing a Future Yard, which is really nice. So we're sort of doing it down here and you're doing it there as well.
Yeah,
So
it's really nice that.
really nice mix. So I'm interested in you in the workshops that you do because I know you're going to be doing something for Future Yard that we'll talk about in a bit. But how did you sort of get into that work? Was it a natural progression of your work anyway? Or did one day you think, oh, this is something that I really feel needs to be addressed in the industry?
Kind of, yeah. So on a personal level, I worked for a while at Jumbo Records, which is a record shop in Leeds. And then I started working at other labels and things like that. Went to work at Ninja Tune for a little while, ran my own label for a little while, which made no money ever, but was fun.
Small label ever.
It was probably one of the most unsuccessful record labels ever. We did one tape which actually sold out, but technically was free. So, and we didn't make any money, but but the artist is great. So, so sort of got a musical background. I did events management and music management at uni. And then I ended up, for some reason, going to work for Stonewall, the charity, the LGBT charity. And my job there was running a lot of their workshops, programs for workplaces to be more inclusive and looking at their policies and things like that. So this job at Come Play With Me is really cool because it kind of it marries up my two things that I've done sort of throughout my career. I guess like music industry and LGBT inclusion are two things that I love doing, and now I don't really have to choose between the two because it's my job at Come Play With Me, which is great. But I think naturally for Come Play With Me, because predominantly the people that we support are working class background, queer people that want to be involved in the music industry, whatever that looks like. So they're not necessarily people that have done it at university or had the chance to go to uni or know people in the industry, which is obviously one of the other problems with the industry itself, is that it's who you know a lot of the time rather than what it is that you know. So I think because our leadership and the people that run Come Play With Me are queer, working class background people, it becomes quite naturally some like a group of people that we then support because they can see themselves in us, and then it sort of becomes that. So now we're in a position where we're able to do that really well, and we're able to support working class queer people really well to do these things and get these jobs in the industry and do that. But we're now looking at where our gaps are and what else we can do, because obviously working class queer people aren't the only marginalized people, and they're not the only people that want a job in the music industry. So we're working with lots of other people this year to pull some of their work into what we do. So thinking about, talking to other organizations like Attitude Is Everything and Black Lives in Music, and trying to work out how we can all support each other a little bit more in terms of equality and diversity across the sector, but also as organizations ourselves, which is really nice thing to be doing.
It is interesting the way I think a lot of queer communities are drawn towards artistic sort of pursuits and stuff, but at the same time are marginalised in those communities. And I think it's quite strange because when you think of the music industry, it's a bunch of people who are from very different backgrounds, but then we don't really see that drip through of like people from these different backgrounds making it to these top roles and having these really important decision making roles in the industry. And that's why I think what Come Play With Me does is really important. So how have you found the LGBTQ plus inclusion workshops that you've been doing? Have you found it to be quite a positive experience with people, or have you felt like there's been some pushback against it?
Really positive, actually. We've done quite a few sessions across. It's good because we sort of talk to funders and people that are doing those huge decision makers within the music industry, but we also go out to community record labels and talk to them about their work as well. So it's a really good mix of like levels within the industry. And I think what you said about decision makers is really important. Like when I think of the music industry, I always think it's white cisgender men that are usually middle class, middle aged, that are running most of it, right? But actually, when you look at artists and musicians and people that are making music, it's the opposite of that often. So like, how do you make sure that those people feel supported in the places that they go, right? So if you've got a musician, for example, who's like, I don't know, like a black trans man, like how are you going to make sure that that person feels comfortable and happy and secure in being themselves in venues, on a tour? Like, are they able to go to every country on their tour list?
Yeah.
People might not necessarily be thinking that if they're not from the LGBT community and don't know what it's like, what the current climate is like for trans people across Europe or across the world. So, I think when you're thinking about the industry, like those decision makers are really important. And so to have those people at board level or at decision making level is really important, particularly for the artists that they're trying to support. And that's something that I think we think is really important at Come Play With Me, is like, you have to be able to provide that support, but the industry has to be able to provide it too, because we can't do all of that. So, if we're sending some of our artists off to venues, then we want to make sure that those venues are inclusive and will look after them and, make sure that they're okay when they're there. because we don't want people to have a bad time once they're in the industry. So there's like a double, like two-pronged approach to it. Maybe it's 4, 5, 6-pronged approach. I don't know, but
yeah, probably a million. Because
yeah.
I think we've talked before about the intersections, because there's been surveys that have come out, like the UK music ones, that show technically, if you look at the music industry, it's a 50-50 gender split at the bottom rung of the ladder. But then the problem is, once you start moving up those rungs, it just increasingly becomes more white middle class men. And I think that's the issue we're really starting to look at, is intersectionality, which I think is really important. So how does Come Play With Me take a very intersectional approach to like their process when it comes to finding people to engage with?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think that's something that's really important, and not necessarily something that we've measured in the past, but something that we have been doing in the last couple of years, and are continuing to do this year, is looking at, like, yeah, so we've got, say, 50 queer people that want to do this one particular thing with us, but what are the intersections within that, and like how can we support, like, a black trans woman that lives in Barnsley is going to have a completely different experience to a white trans man that lives in London, for example. So, like, just because you are trans or just because you are queer doesn't mean that you've got the exact same experience as everyone else within that community. So there's so much nuance within it, and so many different experiences that people have within it. Like, I think for us, it's about supporting communities, but also supporting individuals and making sure that we're doing that, like, individual tailored support to the people that actually need it, and listening, asking people what they want and listening to it and responding accordingly is like the mantra that I always live by, in terms of like doing that outreach, because there's no point, I think, making a program of support that doesn't work for as many people as possible. So the more we can do to support as many people as possible, the better, which may be more work for us in terms of resource and admin, but I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think, like I was saying before, it's really good for you to admit where you're not maybe doing as well, and not sort of taking it as an attack on yourself, or when someone calls you out and goes, "Oh, you're not as inclusive as you think you are." Like when I was running the label, it was all about inclusivity, but when you actually looked at the breakdown of the people we work with, it was predominantly white and
Yeah.
predominantly straight, if I'm honest. So that was something, if I'd been there longer, I would have liked to have improved on, because it didn't feel intersectional to me. But then you also have the issue, you don't want it to become a tick box exercise, hard to say,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
can become an issue as well. So how do you sort of feel about that? Because you want to be inclusive, but you also don't want to be like, oh, I'm including this person because they're a black trans person, even
Yeah.
though maybe their music isn't up to scratch or something. It's those sort of issues that I think we're starting to come up against. Is it inclusive, but is the art not as good? Or should you only include the art that you believe is the best, even if it's all white people or all straight people? That, I think that's the biggest issue that's
Yeah.
now prominent, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing for us is, like, we want to be intentional in the people that we want to support. Like, there are gaps within the industry, right, in terms of lots of different demographics. So we want to ensure that that support is there for the people that need it most or need that step up more. Like, I think it gets really complicated because if you look back then at, say, someone who's more from a more marginalized background or from a couple of different marginalized backgrounds, and they've got, you know, an identity that means that they might not have access to the best recording gear. They might not have access to people that can help them produce something or master something properly, or do production in a way that makes it sound good. Whereas people that have had, the opportunity to go to college, or their dad works in music, or their uncle's a producer, they have that, and other people don't. So I think for us, it's about, like, recognizing that as, like, not the thing that people produce often isn't necessarily a reflection of whether or not they're good at it. It's often what tools they have. And I think the tools that you have could be software, it could be a computer, could be a guitar or an amp, but it also could be, like, your resilience, your mental health, like the things that you have within you to be able to succeed in an industry that is predominantly not for you. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things to think about within that. But then for us as well, it's like we know that we don't have the expertise or the lived experience of people of color, for example. A couple of us are neurodiverse. Speaking for myself, but like we don't have the experience of all neurodiverse people. So you know, we have to bring other people in that have that expertise, that have that lived experience, that have done that work already, because it exists. Like there are loads and loads of organizations that are trans inclusive, that are specifically trans run and trans led, and there are specific organizations that are like, you know, led by women of color within the industry that you can get resources from and you can do that work with. And again, it's like working collaboratively is the thing that I absolutely love doing, because it's like those intersections exist. So if we can work with someone that is doing specific work around disability inclusion, and we can help them with their LGBT inclusion, and you know, it's all about collaborative work for me, and sort of thinking about how we can bring people in and continue to work with them, like having a relationship with other organizations that are also doing similar things to us, but with a different demographic of people and stuff like that, and like creating those relationships, I guess, that are like we all authentically and definitely want to do that. So, you know, yeah.
I think it's really important if you are like an organization like yourself and you're like, okay, well, we don't think that we do this as well, but you can signpost people to somewhere that does, or you can work
Yeah.
with that type of organization, because it's like, I think the problem is a lot of people are like, oh, I need to know everything about everything and how to be completely inclusive. And it's like, no, it's okay to not 100% know where you
Yeah.
are with this and know what you're doing, but it's
Yeah,
good to
definitely.
have support as well from the people who do know what they're on about. And
Yeah.
okay, like such as word and language, knowing what to use, because I remember with the label trying to decide what term to use, and obviously there's
Mhm.
so much of it has become so loaded now, more by the way the media are treating trans people and things like that. It's disgusting, but knowing what term to use so it feels inclusive and you're not upsetting anyone at the same time. And
Yeah,
I think a
yeah,
lot of people shy away from these issues because they're always worried about getting it wrong,
yeah,
which I think is
yeah.
understandable. But I think it's very important to talk about it as well, and to get things wrong sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's two things I think for particularly for trans communities and people wanting to support trans communities, and the reason the reasons I think often that people aren't as explicit as they could be in saying we are trans inclusive, or when we say women we mean all women and we mean non-binary people, um, is like that language thing of not knowing which words to use or not knowing how to say it in a way that includes everyone. But also there's sometimes currently in the media climate, there's a lot of pushback from other people that might not necessarily agree with things being trans inclusive. There's a lot of that around at the moment. So I think there's a two-pronged thing of like, we don't know whether we're saying the right thing for the trans community, but we also don't want to have that pushback online or pushback at our events from people that don't support the trans community. So where's the balance? And it's a tricky one, I think, sometimes. But it is okay to be explicit in the people that you're supporting. And if you're not sure how to do that or how to say that, then it's also okay to ask questions of the people that you want to support. But how would you want us to say this?
Yeah, I
Cool.
think it's really important because it can feel a bit awkward to be like, oh, how would I say that? But then I think people appreciate you asking more than you just assuming, especially asking someone that with that lived experience. But I think another thing that I think about it as well is like me coming to you and going, okay, Tony, what term do I use? I don't want to use you as the arbiter of LGBTQ plus rights, because so many people have different opinions on these things and it can become a
Yeah,
bit like, oh
definitely.
God, what do I say? How do I say it? But I think especially I found with the LGBTQ plus community, if you say something wrong, they're not going to come at you with pitchforks. Like they'll just go, "Oh, this is the term you should use," and then we all move on with our day, and we're like, "Okay, that's fine." Or like if you've known someone for ages and they decide to change their pronouns, and you refer to them as she when they were they just go, "Oh, remember I'm they now," and it's like, "Okay, that's fine." Like,
Yeah, yeah.
but I think there's so much moral panic about it, which is obviously the media doing all this of like the pronouns, people using bathrooms that they supposedly shouldn't, all this silly stuff. and it completely draws away from the actual issue, which is just treating people with respect and giving them the humanity to exist in a world that doesn't want them to, quite frankly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's the thing, right? When you've got government pushback on trans rights and all that kind of thing, like actually what people want to do is be able to go to a gig without having to worry about whether or not someone is going to tell them off for going to the wrong toilet or something.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, just people just want to live their lives with the kind of respect that they deserve as a human, and that's it. It's like it's not in a lot of ways it's not complicated, and in a lot of ways it's very complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's loads of, I think, the small things that you can do to support people or show your support to people, particularly trans people at the moment, and particularly LGBT people, are the most important things. So, you know, just having, I don't know, pronoun badges at your event, or making sure that people can tell you what their pronouns are when they turn up to your event and things like that, is like just such a small thing that actually makes a massive difference for people.
Yeah, I think it also sets the precedent that they sort of understand then.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember, like, I've got on my email thing, she here, and I forwarded something to my mum, and she was like, "Why have you got that?" And because she didn't understand, she's 50-odd-year-old woman. So I explained to her, and I was like, she was like, "But I know that you're she, her, and so does everyone else." And I said, "But it's not about my pronouns, it's about other people feeling included in that and knowing where we stand with that." And it just took that conversation for her to sort of get it. Like, she was still a bit confused, but she sort of understood the premise of it and where it had come from.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think having those conversations is so important, and it is such a little thing, but I am noticing it a lot more now, which is really nice. Even just like bigger companies using it, even though I know
Yeah,
we see a lot of like pride washing and stuff. It's just nice to see that sort of inclusion. I even noticed it in M&S once. There was an M&S I went to, and they had the pronouns on the badge. I was like, that's really nice, and it just makes them feel so much better rather than me going, oh well, she said this. You can go, oh well, they said this to me, and you know probably
yeah.
a lot of customers in M&S aren't going to do that, but like there's a few that will, sort of thing.
Yeah. M&S also do that LGBT History Month sandwich, don't they? Like lettuce, something, bacon, tomato.
Is that what the LGBTs have been fighting for
Yeah,
you?
that's what we've been fighting for this whole time.
I don't
I
think you
don't
need to do any more inclusionary workshops. I think you've got what you want. You might as well just move on, mate.
know. Yeah,
Move on to something new.
we'll
So
find
I
something else.
thought the exciting thing we could talk about is you have a workshop coming up with Future, don't you? So do you want to explain a little bit about what you're going to be talking about on that and sort of who it's for as well?
Yeah. I'm actually really excited to come to Future Yard. I've been trying to find an excuse to come to Future Yard for ages, so this is really good. So it's a free session that we're running with Indie Venue Community. So Indie Venue Community basically do loads of work around Independent Venue Week, support independent venues across the UK, to put on events and gigs and stuff, and champion the work that indie venues do, and how important they are to local music scenes. But they are also trying to get venues to sort of use their spaces in the daytime and use them for different things, and bring in different communities to different venues. So we're doing some regional sessions with them on LGBT inclusion for venues, promoters, people that work with musicians. So yeah, it's free, and it's at Future Yard on Tuesday next week, 1 till 4. So it's very exciting. It's basically you learn a little bit about what it's like for LGBT people at the minute, what the landscape's like in the industry. It's like you talked about the UK Music Report. So we touch on that a little bit and sort of look at where LGBT people are within the music industry, whether or not they're in those decision-making positions or not. And then there's a little bit about kind of the history of safer spaces and where that came from and what that means, and how you can kind of build that into events that you run or tours that you're managing, or even if you're a musician, like how you can ask for certain things at venues. Because a lot of the time, you know, you might be turning up to a venue that doesn't have a gender neutral toilet or a space that people can change, or, you know, there's a lot of different issues around the geography of a venue, and things like that. So there are things that you can ask for as a promoter and as a musician. So we run through a few of those things. Yeah, it's a nice session. It's like 2.5 hours hanging out with me, and then sort of finishing up with some action planning and thinking about how we can all support each other and things like that, and talking about what kind of organisations are around Birkenhead and Liverpool, and how you can find out how to support them and stuff like that. So a bit of signposting as well.
I think
Yeah.
that'll be really good. I think I'm definitely going to be coming to that because I think even though all my research and all my work has been based about like women in music, essentially, I feel quite ignorant when it comes to LGBTQ inclusion because I think because I've always looked at just, okay, well, here's the split of women in the industry, but then that sort of intersectional approach, which I'm starting to engage with a lot more.
Yeah.
I realised how ignorant I was, and especially when I realised I was going to be talking to you about this, I was like, I don't know how many members of the queer community are in these type of positions. And you were telling me before, was it some research that you did with was it Ivers Academy?
I was talking to them this morning. Yeah, I was not part of the research, but they were telling me about the amazing research that they've done. It's interesting. I think when you look at, there are loads and loads of things about women in music and how to support women in music, what the split is between men and women in music industry and all this. But then when you look at gender specifically, or like you look at those women in the music industry, the 50% of the industry is made up of women. How many of those women are women of color, for example? How many of them are women that have disabilities or are part of the queer community? How many of them are all four of those things? So I guess drilling down into some of those stats would be really interesting, I think, and something that I know quite a few people now that are working in the industry are trying to do and trying to find out. Because then it's like, how are you going to make sure that your A&R team, for example, is looking for queer women of colour to do the next couple of releases or whatever, if your A&R team doesn't have anyone from that background or identity within it. So yeah, I think there's a few different things to think about in the industry itself. But yeah.
I even noticed when I was looking at like my Spotify and I was looking at like the artists who I listened to, and I was like, God, I don't think and many of them are queer artists. It was mostly like straight white people, and I was like, oh God. I was
Yeah,
like, they must have
some
inclusion
people's
like,
Spotify Wrapped was very undiverse, let's say.
yeah, I was quite shocked at mine because for the first time ever, my top artists were all men. And that's never I was even
Are you all right?
I was like, "Oh my God, I'm not a feminist anymore, what's happened?" Even honestly, I was shocked. I was like, "I'm sorry, when did I start listening to men? Where's Phoebe Bridgers? Where is she?"
Phoebe Bridgers gone? She's at the top of mine, don't worry.
And Boy Genius as well, who announced their new album.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for us to consider the best ways to be an ally. So it's such a big question, but what would you say is the best way to go about supporting queer people in your music career, or everyday sort of working with organisations?
Whew, that is a
It's
big
such a big question, and
it is a
honestly,
massive
I don't
question.
expect an answer, but any just little, like, obviously we talked about pronouns, which I think is a really important one to start with. Are there
Yeah.
any other things that you think just to start off getting, like, being more inclusionary to the queer community?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's generally about just being intentional with it. Like, if you know that you're recruiting for a job, for example, if you're working at a label or you're in, an organization within the industry and you're doing that recruitment, or you're looking for an apprentice or volunteers, or like if you're, recruiting anyone for anything, I think it's about intentionally finding people and saying, we are looking for this demographic of people because they're underrepresented in our area and in the industry. And particularly if you're putting on events and gigs and stuff, like, there's not much of an excuse if you're running a festival or an all-dayer, for example, to have an all-white lineup. There's not really an excuse for that. And something that we're trying to work on at Come Play With Me is like making sure that we're more intentional with the people that we want to hear from. You don't necessarily have to hear from, if you're running a panel or something like that, you don't necessarily have to hear from someone who's at a senior level in an organization. Like, often a lot of the people that come on our panels are people that have never done one before or have never done public speaking before and are a bit like, why me? Well, like, because you have a story to tell and an experience to share that is interesting, sure, but also really valuable for the audience. So I guess it's thinking about who your audience are, thinking about who your lineup is or who it is that you want to hear from. And I think on an individual level, just making sure you're listening to people, like, and using the words and phrases that people want you to use when you're referring to them or when you're talking to them in terms of like pronouns and whatever else. But yeah, I think just making sure that you're listening to people is my top tip, generally.
I really like that approach that you Come Play With Me take with conferences and talks, because I think the problem we see a lot of the time at the moment is the same people cropping up talking on panels and stuff, and I think it becomes a bit like a vacuum of people just saying the same things. So
Yeah,
I think if you can get someone in more of an unorthodox position in the industry who's maybe not like a bit higher up and but has got a different experience, that can be a lot more interesting than someone with
yeah,
more clout and power, because at
yeah.
least you're going to hear something new from them. And I think that's something I really like about Come Play With Me in your work.
Yeah, exactly. And I always think that, like, if someone's at a junior level in an organization, they're not always going to be. They might not always be at that organization,
Yeah.
sure. But they're not always going to be in a junior position there. And something I think that's important, I guess, internally for us as well as an organization is making sure that when we're bringing people in to work with us, we're offering them other opportunities elsewhere, or we're sending them off to a different job with a different organization that we know, or we're sending them, like, helping them with job applications and whatever else. And yeah, again, like that internal work for us around who is in our organization and who it's for. Like,
Yeah.
we've done a lot of auditing of who our audience is and who wants our support, who needs our support. Therefore, who should the project team be? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to start running a specific program for people of color, for example, because we don't have that in the project team. Like, sure, we have it at board level and we have it in the team of people that we support, but we don't necessarily have it in project manager teams. So if we were going to do that work, we would bring someone in a paid role that has that identity that would want to do that
Yeah.
with us. And it's not about, for us, it's about being honest where our gaps are. And I think that's a key thing with allyship as well, is like, you don't have all the answers and you can't do all the work yourself.
Mm.
And like, I think being honest about where you're at is part of that work. But it's ongoing, like, it never stops and you never have all the answers. So
Because I sometimes think, oh, I should know this already. And I'm like, well, no. And you can Google something and be like, oh, I think I need to ask someone, but you shouldn't feel bad for it because your intention's in the right place to learn and to understand. And I think
yeah,
having an open mind is so important with things, because I think so many people have got such a closed mind to these issues now, unfortunately, because of the way the media is reporting on these things, is they think it's very much black and white when it's not a lot of the time. There's so many nuances, like what we're seeing
yeah,
in Scotland at the moment, the way trans people aren't being essentially given the right to change their gender, or not just trans, but like just to change their gender and to live in the way that they want to with dignity. And it's like, it's such a small thing, but then all we're hearing is, oh, but they want to use the same bathroom. It's like, but they've been using the same
been
bathroom
doing it for ages.
for decades, for
Yeah,
forever. Like,
yeah,
trans people haven't just started to exist in this world. They've
exactly
been
right.
around us for forever.
Yeah,
Since time begun, there has probably been trans people.
yeah,
Like, it's just baffling the way we've got this big moral panic.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that is what scares people, unfortunately.
yeah,
And I'm
definitely.
upset and angry every day that I see it. So I shouldn't spend as much time on Twitter as I do.
Yeah, stop looking at Twitter is
One of the
also
greatest kindnesses you can do to yourself is probably block JK Rowling.
yeah, probably, but yeah, remove yourself from Twitter if possible is also a good piece of advice.
I could never follow it though. That's my problem. But I think the next thing I want to talk about was the conference that's coming. The conference that's coming up, because I think it sort of leads on nicely when we were talking about Come Play With Me wanting to platform different people as well, which I think the conference is going to do. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about it and the date, and then maybe some of what's going on around the conference as well?
Yeah, it's really exciting this year. It seems to have we've been doing it for 7 years. This is the 7th.
And we met at the last one, didn't we?
Yeah.
First time.
Yeah. So 7 years. This is the 7th one. It's the biggest one we've done. It seems to have like naturally got slightly bigger every time we've done it.
Yeah.
So I think it started as like 50 people. Maybe it started as like a panel or something even. But then it became like a 50 people, 70 people. Now we're up to a 200 capacity venue. And we've got fancy lanyards and wristbands and stuff for the first time, which is very cool. But yeah, it's at Howard Assembly Rooms in Leeds on the 27th of January. So we are taking over the space for the whole day, and we've got 3 panels. One is about supporting diversity in the music industry. So Shardine Taylor-Stone from Big Journey is going to be running that one. And then we've got Eve Horn, who's going to be chairing a Parents and Carers in Music panel. And our own Eva Davis, our label manager, is going to be running a panel on finding your place in the industry, and how people can kind of find what they want to do and carve out their niche. Because I think a lot of the time in the industry, in the music industry itself, like you think, oh, you either put on gigs or you're a musician or you run a label. And there are so many jobs within the industry. Some of them, like mine, you can just make it up and do it yourself. Like,
just make up your own role.
Completely made it up. I've just made that up.
Well, I never thought I'd be an artist mentor, and I'm telling people what to do, and I'm like, who gave me this authority to tell people what to do?
Who gave me doing this right? But yeah, so we've got three panels, which all kind of came out of the feedback that we got from last year. That people wanted to see a diverse mixture of hosts, and they wanted to see stuff about parenting, caring, solidarity in the industry, what that means, and how they can start a career and things. We've also got an in conversation, which I mean, you could probably tell me more about that because you're running that part.
So I'm going to be there. So I attended the Come Play With Me conference. I met everyone for the first time last year. So this time I will be essentially leading the in conversation, and we've announced that Becky from Steel and Cheap is doing it. I don't know if we've announced the other person, so I'm not going to say it yet, but there's someone else who I'm going to be interviewing as well. It makes it sound very like, oh, but I'm just, the main focus for me is just sort of understanding their career paths, because the 2 artists have very different careers, because obviously Steel and Cheap were signed to Heavenly, and they've now sort of gone on that independent route, and they put out an album on the label I used to run. And then the other artist is signed to a subsidiary of, I think, EMI at the moment, and is based in London, was originally from Scotland. So I think it's really important to sort of understand the decisions these artists have made, which is a big thing I'm always interested in. Like, okay, if you were born in Scotland, why did you move to London to pursue a career? And then Bex is from down south, but she's lived in Liverpool since her uni days. And how have she managed to create a career for themselves and stay true to their lovely wackiness, which is what I love about them, under the pressure of putting out something that was more commercial on a label. I think that would be really interesting. And then just sort of talking about those issues and the routes that they've took into that as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, especially for musicians, to think about like all the different ways in which they can release an album, or like, you don't necessarily have to be signed to a major, you don't have to be signed at all, really.
And that works for some people as well. So there's so many different routes in.
Yeah.
And I think I don't want it to be like we don't like big labels bashing, because I think that happens a lot now, whereas it can be so beneficial for some people. So speaking to someone who has gone down that route, I want to go, okay, well, why does that work for you? What teams do you have around you to support with that? And because I hate when you do like industry panels, or you go to something and they're like, how did you get the job in the industry? And they're like, I manifested, I dreamed, I achieved, I just prayed and I got my job. I was just nice to people. And I'm like, but is that actually how this went down?
Because I think that's the thing, right? For us, it's like having those honest conversations with people. Like, if the reason and way that you got into the music industry is because your mum was a recording artist in the 80s,
be honest,
that's great, well done, and you had that opportunity, and that's brilliant. But there are also loads of other routes in. It's not necessarily the only way in, and that's not necessarily what success looks like for everyone. Like, every musician is going to have a different idea of what success looks like to them, and if you want to be headlining Glastonbury, that's great. But if your goal is, do a headline tour of O2 academies. Cool, that's great too. Like, it's not, you don't have to be, you don't have to even want to go on tour. You could just be a recording musician. You could do sessions. You could do anything else. Like, there are so many different ways in and different things that you could do as a musician within the industry. It's not necessarily all headlining Glastonbury, although that would be fun. But
I think the problem with the music industry, it's been so ruined by like programs like the X Factor and stuff, and this illusion of the £250,000 record deal, and people just still assume that that is the process that we all go through. And if you look at all the people who are on X Factor, they're probably broken people. Like, some of them have gone on to do quite well, but a lot of them have ended up with severe issues. Like, I don't know if you do you remember Katie Wessel, the blonde girl, and
from
I can't remember where she's from, but the editor there to look crazy. Well, I saw a thing about her yesterday. She's retrained to be a lawyer.
oh, amazing.
Icon Simon Cowell, because she disagreed with the contract she had to sign. And I was like,
Lovely.
that's icon status right there.
That is a level of petty that I absolutely aspire to.
That is a level of petty I am every day.
Yeah, what a journey. That is great.
But I was like, wow. And then obviously all the work, have you seen Rebecca Ferguson? She's from Liverpool, all the work she's been doing with Key Change. And
Yeah,
she's
yeah,
basically been calling the music industry out
yeah,
at every step. And I'm
yeah.
like, I respect her so much, because I think another problem in the industry is a lot of time when people call stuff out, they're then blocked out of everything, and then the circles become even more closed. And
Yeah.
we were saying before about like some panels, and you see some people on it, and you're like, was that really the right person to have on?
Yeah, yeah. I just think there's a lot of gatekeeping information, isn't there? Like, particularly around the legal stuff, like signing
Yeah,
contracts, looking at like, not everyone, most people probably don't have the expertise to read a 40-page contract and understand what it means for
yeah.
them individually. And if someone's saying, sign this and we'll give you 100 grand and you can make music forever,
You're like,
you're going to sign it, right?
that's the thing.
You don't necessarily know what all the small print means and what all that jargon means. So I think having those open and kind of honest conversations with people and finding that information out and what it means. Like, there are loads of great organizations doing that work and offering that support, you know, PRS and PPL and all those places doing like licensing stuff. They have that community support for people. I think that's really important. Like, yeah, one of the key things I think for changing the industry is like it being accessible to people and
Yeah, 'cause I
easily
think it's
understood for
knowledge, isn't
people.
it? Because
Yeah,
so many people get screwed over and don't know how to make a sustainable career because they haven't been given the knowledge. And I think that's something that I'm so passionate about trying to support young people with now, especially through the mentor in a future, because I realized that my experience in the industry was a million miles apart from everyone else.
yeah,
Like, because I went to LIPA, I'd not from a musical family or anything, but I got into LIPA, and then I had a really solid teacher who taught me the basics of contracts, accounting, like making a sustainable career and how to sort of build your brand up. And we were taught
yeah,
this so well, and I engaged with it and really drilled it into me. So when I left uni, I didn't find it easy, but I found it easier to
yeah,
do all this and to understand the basics of like copyright and stuff like that. Whereas I
yeah,
was listening to other people, especially since I was working at the label, and going, okay, well, did you learn this? And they went to like music and studied. Sorry, they went to university and studied a music course, and they're like, oh no, we never covered that. And I'm like, but 50%
why?
of being a good musician or good person working in the industry is understanding the industry. It's like, because I think as the X Factor proves a million times over, there are a lot of good singers and a lot of good musicians. Like, that's not enough anymore. And I
Yeah,
think that's
which is the annoying thing, I think. Like,
yeah,
especially if you're in a band or whatever, like, you have to be an expert in like reading contracts and legal stuff and budgeting and tour managing and marketing and making sure your TikTok has enough followers and all that sort of stuff. Like, it's a very difficult thing to do if you don't have a team of people
yeah,
around you. So I think that's one of the other super key things about the conference is like it brings lots of people together that have different expertise, and like if you can build a team of people around you and meet people and talk to people, networking is like super cringe. I always
yeah.
think, like,
Oh, you're
I
like,
hate it. I'm like, hello, I'm a person. It's really bad. But it's also one of those things that's really important. Like, I think anything that's built on like friendship and wanting to do things together and collaboration is really important. So it's like, especially if you're a musician or a creative of any kind, like you're going to need people around you that can make a, I don't know, Instagram reel, or can help you with some photography, or can do some illustration for your album cover, or someone that can play bass or can pick up a guitar or can drive a van or whatever. Like you're going to need those people around you. So I think when you're, the collaboration thing I think is really important, especially like having a bunch of people that are as diverse as possible and like have loads of different experiences, because that's where you find expertise. Like,
Yeah, definitely. I think the way I've sort of gravitated in the industry is all my friendships and the people I work with, it's been the most organic way possible of me just being like, hello. And then us just getting on really well. Like me and you met at the conference last year at the bar. And I
yeah,
was like, hello. And we somehow found out that both our mums are called Julie and both of them are dinner ladies. And I was like, well, we were clearly meant to be friends then.
clearly that's
What a
that.
niche.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, how do you feel this? Like I found being in the music industry, it's never even been intentional, but I've
Mm.
naturally gravitated towards working with a massive group of women, because when I think of all the people I work with, it's mostly women now. And it wasn't even the way I set it out to be, because my uni was majority men, and being a drummer as well, most of the people I knew in bands were men and things. So I don't really know how it ended up that way, but it's the way I've naturally gravitated. So I think women and minorities naturally gravitate towards each other anyway.
Yeah,
How do you think
definitely.
so?
Yeah. I think particularly for the LGBT community, like there's solidarity is a really important thing within the community, you know, like
Yeah,
um I mean, to use the example again, like particularly for trans people at the minute, like that solidarity of people, other people within the LGBT community that don't necessarily identify as trans is really important, and like that's what's gonna, you know, keep people moving forward and keep things moving
mhm,
forward for different people. Um, so again, yeah, it's all about collaborating with other people in all the ways for me and for us
yeah.
as an organisation. So yeah,
I do find, because it's funny, because I'm like, I'm not anti men in any way, but I just naturally gravitate towards women. I'm like, I hate men. It's just so somehow ends up that way. But then weirdly enough, some of my biggest supporters and biggest cheerleaders throughout my career have been men, which is not something I ever thought would happen. Like my lecturer Matt, who's now my PhD supervisor, he met me when I was 18 and he auditioned me for Lipper, and he's just been like my biggest cheerleader throughout my career. And I'm like, I never thought I'd have like this male mentor who was like there for me at every step and was always so supportive of what I did and was always there to ask questions and stuff. So I think the biggest issue I have at the moment with inclusivity is trying to get the people who aren't marginalized on board, because I think if they see like an event like this, like, okay, we've got an event for women, marginalized genders in music, or it's about inclusivity, I think a
yeah,
lot of men go, not for me. And I'm like, no, no, you're the people who need to be in the room, because my issue at the
yeah,
moment, if I talk on something, I always start off by going, I don't think any of you need to hear what I'm about to say, because you all get it anyway. Like, I don't really think I speak to a room of people and they go, oh, I've never thought of it that way, because they they get it. Like, and I think that's my biggest issue, is how to engage people who aren't marginalized to sort of come into the circle and learn about it as well.
yeah, definitely. We've had a couple of people actually send us messages and be like, "Can I come to this? Is this for me?"
Yeah,
Particularly like the last few years. So this year we really tried to be as open as possible with like the ticketing and be kind of like, this is for everyone. Like it's sort of aimed at supporting women, people of marginalised genders, queer people
yeah,
within the industry, but it is for everyone to come and take something away from it. And I'm hoping that by the end of the day, everyone will be able to leave with a bit of a, right, this is what I can do then, or this is something I can change in the way that I work, or
yeah.
this is someone I can work with. Yeah, I'm going to try and encourage that in the networking bits of like, yeah, what's your action plan for after this? Like, how are you going to keep doing, you know, some of this work, and who are you going to work with and stuff?
Yeah, I think I definitely, it's so hard, because I understand the need for spaces for marginalized people. Like, obviously, like for the open call for the label we did, it just for women and marginalized genders, and then also there are events that are for like women and marginalized genders. And I understand that we need those spaces for those communities to feel safe and to feel like they can create and sort of meet each other. But then it's like, at what stage do we bring in those people who aren't marginalized? And like, when does this start to happen? I think that's the question that is becoming more prevalent, because we've seen so many events and so much stuff going on around marginalized communities. And it's like, but how do we start making it someone else's problem as well? Because I think we keep it as our problem.
Yeah,
That's the
other people
issue
have
at
to
the
do the
moment.
work, right? Like
Yeah.
it shouldn't just be on marginalized people to fix the problems. And I think as well, like, a lot of the problems are very systemic across not just the music industry, but across like
Definitely.
the world, across, like, when you think of the bigger picture for marginalized people across just the UK, it's like we are working in a capitalist structure. We have a government that is pretty fascist at the moment, like across different parts of Europe as well as here. So it's hard because you get that pushback, and you get, we are always going to be living in a capitalist world, and a world that doesn't necessarily isn't set up, like a lot of systems that we use daily are not set up for marginalized people. If anything, some of the systems that are set up are actively pushing them out. So you're working within constructs that aren't necessarily helpful for people's identities, or are going to support people to do things, especially in a creative industry, because there's no money here either. So it's like you're being pushed out, and there's also no money in it. Why are we here? What are we doing? But like, yeah, I think it's about trying to change those small things that are going to make a difference now, and letting that ripple effect take place. Like, I cannot think that in my lifetime we will live in the anti-capitalist utopia that I would like, but I can do things within my job and within my life to kind of alleviate some of that stuff for people. So we're trying to do that a bit, and I think that's really key as well. Just making sure that the things that you do and the things that you're in control of, you can change and you can adapt to help different people.
Definitely. I think that's really important. And I think all of us can do something little, even if it's just adding our pronouns in our email or something like that. Or when we put out something, we think of the word, and does this include different types of people? Like, I remember with the label call out, I did so many like interviews, like cringy little interviews on BBC. And I really pushed the idea that it wasn't just for women, it was for marginalised genders as well. And we actually saw, it was still a small amount, but we actually saw quite a few trans people and people who didn't identify as straight applying. It was really nice as well. And I was like, this is great. I'm made up that we're starting to see that inclusionary, because I was worried we wouldn't get any trans representation. But I really tried to push it every time. I was like, this is for trans people as well. This is for trans women.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
sort of making that clear, because I think if those communities sort of know that you're including them, they're a lot more likely to engage with it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's like you said, like, trying not to make that a tick box thing. Like, having support for people when they get to your organization or when they get to work with you is equally, well, if not more important. It's okay being like, you can come in and you can join us and you can be here, but we don't have any systems in place to support you. Sorry. So it's about kind of doing that, like, I guess, like we said earlier, like that double pronged thing of like, how do you make sure you're bringing people in and making sure that they are here and they can stay and they have a voice that they can use.
And I think the biggest thing for me is, when we talk about equality and diversity, for me, it comes down to helping people make a sustainable career, because the only way we're going to have that equality and diversity if there's more people feel like they can engage in the industry and they can make it into a career. So it is learning all those basics as well, like learning about branding, learning about like contracts, learning what not to sign and what to sign, like all these things. You may think, how is that anything to do with equality and diversity? But I'm like, but if we're creating a better group of people who understand the industry, they're more likely to be able to engage with the industry structures and move up and change it from the inside as well.
Yeah, and change those structures.
Which is important, because I would like to see more women and more queer people heading up record labels, especially the majors, because at the moment I can't really think of any major that's run by a woman or a queer person. I could be wrong, but I can't really, off the top of my head, think that any of them are.
And if they are, they're not
really shouting about it.
It's not something that's been shouted about too much. Yeah.
And then you see like people waving their little pride flags and like the bank changing it to like a pride symbol for a month, and you're like, please stop.
Cheers, Barclays, yeah.
Thank you, Barclays.
Yeah,
You're
really appreciate that. Yeah, if you really supported queer people, you wouldn't keep telling me I was overdrawn.
I think that's a hate crime, quite frankly.
It's not a me problem.
It's a you problem. You not supporting the queer community here. Oh, but thank you so much for this. So just to recap, your event's on Tuesday.
Yeah.
LGBTQ inclusion, part of Independent Menu Week. The conference is on the 27th. Me and you will be there. Come chat to us. And if Come Play With Me got anything good coming up that you'd like to signpost or you think people should apply to?
We've got a couple of call outs up for our next compilation. So all the information is on our website, which is cpwm.co. So if you look on there, there's stuff on the label tab about how you can apply for that. We've got a bunch of new promoters that will be putting on events with us as part of Leeds 23, which is like the City of Culture thing for this year. So we've just finished that round of applications. So we're just taking 12 people through to do 12 events. So if you want to come to any of those, that would be great. There is also a IVC event in Sheffield that we're not promoting, but our friends at PPL are promoting. So there's one in Sheffield, and I think one of the PPL ones is at Future Yard with
yes, the English teacher. So I'm going to go to that because there's like a networking thing as well for people. So I think that'll be really good. And can I also encourage anyone who would like to sign up to Propeller and access the support from us, because you get access to all these webinar things we do, but then also you can have one-on-one mentoring, and we can sort of cover the things that we have talked about. Like I can help you with contracts, we can help you with like branding, listening to demos. There's so many like random things we can do with you that will just help you create a more sustainable career, and it's all free to access, which I think is great. So please follow Come Play With Me, because their work is fabulous and they're some of my favorite people, and I feel like I'm an adopted member of the family. I'm just like rock up to your events and I'm like, hello, please.
I love that there's a photo on our Instagram of the label team and you're in it and I'm not.
We went for lunch and they were like, oh, we're going to take a team photo. And I was like, oh, I'll get out. And they were like, no, you stay in. And I'm like that in the background.
That's fine.
I'm just an adopted member of the team who's not on payroll.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like for us, like as soon as we work with someone, they just become part of the big Come Play With Me family. We don't let people go that easily. So
oh, God help me.
Yeah,
I'm scared about the conference next week. I'll never leave Leeds, will I?
Well, I had a dream the other day that I moved to Liverpool, so maybe we just.
I mean, well, you should, because Liverpool's great. So
this is what people keep.
You know what? You might come over because you come to Birkenhead, obviously, for your session.
Yeah.
You could fall in love with it and be like, I'm not leaving.
I could never return to London. That'd be
come stay with us. We're nicer. Anyway, thank you so much for that. It was absolutely amazing.
No worries. It's great to chat.
Yes, it was so nice to chat to you, and I'll see you in person next week. So thank you everyone for watching. And if there are any questions, you can always like just message us on Future Yard and things like that. So, and please follow Come Play With Me, because their work is great. So yeah, thank you so much.
No worries. Speak to you soon.
Bye.